Mark. Chapter 5. And they came to the other side of the sea, into the region of the Gerasenes. And when he came out of the boat, immediately, from out of the tombs, a man with an unclean spirit met him, who had his dwelling among the tombs. And no one could bind him any longer, not even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles smashed, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. And continually night and day, among the tombs and in the mountains, he cried out and gashed himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and worshipped him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What do I have to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." And he questioned him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "Legion is my name, because we are many." And he entreated him much not to send them out of the region. Now there on the mountainside was a great herd of hogs feeding. And they entreated him, saying, "Send us to the hogs, so that we may enter into them." And he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered into the hogs, and the herd, about 2,000, rushed down the steep slope into the sea, and they were drowned in the sea. And those who were feeding them fled and reported it in the city and in the countryside. And they came to see what had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man sitting down, clothed, and saying, "The man who had the legion," and they became frightened. And those who had seen it related to them how it had happened to the demon-possessed man and concerning the hogs. And they began to entreat him to depart from their borders. And as he got into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might stay with him. And he did not allow him, but said to him, "Go to your house, to your own people, and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. And when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered to him, and he was beside the sea. And one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and seeing him, fell at his feet. And he entreated him much, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed and live." And he went with him, and a great crowd followed him and pressed upon him. And a woman was there, who had a flow of blood for 12 years. She had suffered much under many physicians and had spent everything she had and had not benefited at all, but rather became worse. When she heard the things concerning Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be healed." And immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she knew in her body that she was cured of the affliction. And immediately Jesus, realizing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing upon you and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see her who had done this. But the woman, frightened and trembling, knew what had happened to her, and she came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be well from your affliction." While he was still speaking, some came from the house of the ruler of the synagogue, saying, "Your daughter has died. Why bother the teacher any longer?" But Jesus, overhearing the word spoken, said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And he did not allow anyone to accompany him except Peter and James and John the brother of James. And they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and he saw a commotion and people weeping and wailing greatly. And he entered in and said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child has not died but is sleeping." And they laughed scornfully at him. But he, putting them all out, took the father of the child and the mother and those with him and went into where the child was. And he took hold of the child's hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which being interpreted is, "Little girl, to you I say, arise." And immediately the little girl rose up and walked about, for she was 12 years old. And immediately, they were amazed with great amazement. And he strongly commanded them that no one should know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. Mark. Chapter 6. And he went out from there and came into his own country, and his disciples followed him. And when the Sabbath had come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing were astounded, saying, Where did this man get these things? And what is this wisdom given to this man, and how is it that such works of power take place through his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joses and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they were stumbled in him. And Jesus said to them, A prophet is not without honor except in his own country and among his own relatives and in his own house. And he could not do any work of power there, except to lay his hands upon a few of the sick and heal them. And he marveled because of their unbelief, and he went around the villages in a circuit, teaching. And he called the 12 to him and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. And he charged them not to take anything for the journey except only a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belt. But to have sandals tied on, and said, Do not put on 2 tunics. And he said to them, Wherever you enter into a house, there remain until you depart from that place. And whatever place does not receive you nor hear you, as you go out from there, shake off the dust under your feet for a testimony against them. And they went forth and proclaimed that men should repent. And they cast out many demons and anointed many of the sick with oil and healed them. And King Herod heard of it, for his name had become known, and they said, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and because of this these works of power are operating through him. But others said, He is Elijah, and others said, He is a prophet, like one of the prophets. But Herod, hearing of it, said, He whom I beheaded, John, this one was raised. For Herod himself had sent men and seized John and bound him in prison on account of Herodias, the wife of Philip his brother, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, It is not lawful for you to have the wife of your brother. Thus, Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him and could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and kept him safe. And when he heard him, he was very perplexed yet heard him gladly. And an opportune day came, when Herod on his birthday made a banquet for his courtiers and the commanders and the leading men of Galilee. And when the daughter of Herodias herself entered and danced, she pleased Herod and those reclining at table with him. The king said to the girl, Ask of me whatever you want, and I will give it to you. And he swore to her earnestly, Whatever you ask of me, I will give to you, up to half of my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, What should I ask for? And she said, The head of John the Baptizer. And coming in immediately with haste to the king, she asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was very grieved, yet because of the oaths and those reclining at table, he did not want to refuse her. And immediately the king sent a guard and ordered him to bring his head. And he went out and beheaded him in the prison. And brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard about it, they came and took his corpse and put it in a tomb. And the apostles gathered together to Jesus and reported to him all that they did and all that they taught. And he said to them, Come by yourselves privately to a deserted place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have opportunity to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place privately. And many saw them going away and recognized them, and they ran together there on foot from all the cities and got there before them. And getting out, he saw a great crowd, and he was moved with compassion for them because they were like sheep not having a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. And when the hour had already become late, his disciples came to him and said, This place is deserted, and the hour is already late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding fields and villages and buy for themselves something to eat. But he answered and said to them, You give them something to eat. And they said to him, Shall we go away and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? And he said to them, How many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. And he ordered them to have all recline by companies on the green grass. And they sat down in groups, by hundreds and by 50s. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and, looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before them, and the 2 fish he divided among all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 full hand baskets of the broken pieces of bread and of the fish. And those who had eaten the loaves were 5,000 men. And immediately he compelled his disciples to step into the boat and go before to the other side, toward Bethsaida, while he sent the crowd away. And after he said farewell to them, he went away to the mountain to pray. And when evening fell, the boat was in the midst of the sea and he was alone on the land. And seeing them distressed as they rowed, for the wind was contrary to them, he came toward them about the 4th watch of the night, walking on the sea, and he intended to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought that it was a ghost, and they cried out. For they all saw him and were startled. But immediately he spoke with them and said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." And he went up unto them into the boat, and the wind ceased. And they were greatly astonished in themselves beyond measure. For they did not understand concerning the loaves, but rather their heart was hardened. And they crossed over to the land and came to Gennesaret and moored there. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him. And they ran about that whole region and began to carry around on mats those who were ill to any place where they heard that he was. And wherever he entered into villages or into cities or into the countryside, they laid those who were sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch if even the fringe of his garment, and as many as touched him were healed. Mark. Chapter 7. And the Pharisees and some of the scribes gathered together to him when they had come from Jerusalem. And had seen that some of his disciples ate bread with common hands, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, unless they carefully wash their hands, do not eat, holding the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, unless they wash themselves, they do not eat. And there are many other things which they have received to hold, the dipping of cups and pitchers and copper vessels. And the Pharisees and the scribes questioned him, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with common hands?" And he said to them, "Well has Isaiah prophesied concerning you hypocrites, as it is written, This people honors me with their lips, but their heart stays far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as teachings the commandments of men. While leaving the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men." And he said to them, "You nicely set aside the commandment of God that you may keep your tradition. For Moses said, Honor your father and your mother, and, he who speaks evil of father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or his mother, Whatever you would have been profited by me is now korban, that is, a gift to God. Allow him to no longer do anything for his father or his mother. Thus you deprive the word of God of its authority by your tradition which you have handed down. And many things similar to these you do." And he called the crowd to him again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside of a man which entering into him can defile him, but the things coming out of a man are the things which defile a man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear." And when he entered into a house from the crowd, his disciples questioned him concerning the parable. And he said to them, "Are you also in the same manner without understanding? Do you not understand that everything that enters from outside into a man is not able to defile him? Because it does not enter into his heart, but into the stomach, and goes out into the drain? In saying this, he made all foods clean. And he said, That which goes out of the man, that defile the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil reasonings, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, foolishness. All these wicked things proceed from within and defile the man." And he rose up from there and went away into the borders of Tyre and Sidon. And entering into a house, he wanted no one to know about it, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and immediately she came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Greek, Syrophoenician by race. And she asked him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "First let the children be satisfied, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." And she answered and said to him, Yes, Lord, but even the little dogs under the table eat of the little children's crumbs. And he said to her, Because of this word, go. The demon has gone out of your daughter. And she went away to her house and found the little child lying on the couch and the demon gone out. And again he came out of the borders of Tyre and came through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the midst of the borders of Decapolis. And they brought to him one who was deaf and who spoke with difficulty, and they entreated him to lay his hand on him. And he took him aside from the crowd privately and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he groaned and said to him, Ephphatha. That is, be opened. And immediately his ears were opened, and the bond on his tongue was released and he spoke clearly. And he charged them not to tell anyone. But the more he charged them, so much the more they proclaimed it. And they were utterly astounded, saying, He has done all things well, he makes both the deaf hear and the dumb speak.